We still have work to do at All Souls to eliminate racism and other oppressions. But you can't eliminate what you cannot see. And when we're operating from the dominant cultural frame, it can be difficult to see how racism and other oppressions work. So if church is working well for you, you just might be filtering out some of the important information that contradicts the notion that things are just fine the way they are. The person sitting right next to you, or in the pew behind you, or the person who didn't show up this morning may be experiencing the church in a different way. All of us have bought into a Western middle-class set of rules. I'm not saying that the rules shouldn't exist. I'm not saying that they're good or bad. But we have to notice that they're there. And we've internalized so many of these rules that it's difficult for us to see how many ways we insist that people conform to the existing cultural traditions and the existing arrangement. Constantly reinforcing the rules can create the barriers to inclusion and to change. If you want to change the culture, you must re-examine and change the rules. And the irony of all of this is that we can say we want change and diversity, and at the same time work against our own vision. I appreciated the liturgical dance this morning. Last year I attended a Christian liturgical dance program. And as one of the ladies came up to the microphone, she started by saying, "No test, no testimony." I wrote those words down. Then she went on to give her personal testimony of dealing with illness. And in that statement, no test, no testimony, is a reminder to us that the change that we speak of, the change we seek, requires struggle and persistence. It's very easy to think that because we believe in liberal values, that we are on the right side when it comes to racism and oppression. But if we're constantly reinforcing dominant culture, then there is little room for authentic multicultural engagement. It's also easy to say that we believe in the Unitarian Universalist principles because they are too rarely tested on matters of race. No test, no testimony. So this morning I want to give you a personal testimony about how Western middle-class rules can work against what it is we say we want to change. Not long ago, I was working in another Unitarian Universalist congregation, helping them to organize their approach to racial justice and inclusion. We had a very productive weekend. The trip exceeded my expectations. And I had been asked to observe the church on Sunday morning and to give feedback to the ministers. One of my observations left me metaphorically standing right in the middle of a puddle. I had commented on the casual dress of a lay leader. And although I couched my comments in terms of my personal preference, I knew that they carried a lot more weight than just my preference. And what I realized was I was reinforcing the Western middle-class rules about professionalism, which is a judgment that comes out of middle-class privilege. This was in contradiction to my own social justice values. So I'm going to ask you, how many times have you sloshed right through one of these puddles, splashing others without knowing it or without caring about it? Were you reinforcing the rules and just doing what is right? And when we find ourselves in one of these situations, we might feel regret, embarrassment, confusion, maybe even righteousness. How often do we want to avoid the situation and the follow-up conversation and just explain it away? We might do that, but it doesn't take into consideration the damage that was done to the other person. So the next time you find yourself standing in one of those puddles, stop Stand there for a moment. Feel it. Notice how you are participating in what's going on. How do your thoughts, your words, or your actions minimize another person? Learn the lesson, because it might help you to choose a different response the next time. I had to stop and take the time because in order for me to do my work with integrity, I have to learn these very important and often very subtle lessons. But if I do, then I might avoid doing this again in the future, and I also might be able to help other people to see how the status quo is perpetuated at the expense of diversity and inclusion. Linda Stout is the author of one of the Beacon Press books named Bridging the Class Divide. She's also the founder of the Piedmont Peace Project, and she wrote, "Why haven't we yet learned to build more effective, multiracial, multi-class organizations? We'll begin to find some answers when we look closely at the invisible wall or barriers that low-income people and people of color often encounter when joining primarily white, middle-class organizations. I had to become bilingual in order to be accepted in a middle-class world. Unfortunately, my first language, the English that I learned to speak as a Southern, low-income woman, is not seen as equal. If I talk the way that comes most naturally to me, people judge me as being unintelligent or at least inarticulate. We must learn to honor each other's language." End of quotation.